On July 18, 2025, France quietly withdrew from Senegal, ending 65 years of its military presence. Just like that, the last foreign troops were gone. Why now? What forced France to leave? And what does this mean for Africa's future? Let's find out. For decades, French troops were a silent fixture in Senegal. They weren't just soldiers, they were symbols of France's enduring influence, stationed at Camp Gale in Dakar and a key air detachment at Blaise Diagne International Airport. These weren't temporary deployments, they were permanent state-supported installations, a legacy of France's colonial past dressed in modern uniforms and quiet diplomacy. But between July 17th and 18th, 2025, that legacy came to a historic end. In a coordinated handover, the French government officially transferred control of both military sites to Senegalese authorities. It marked the final step in a phased withdrawal that began discreetly in March 2025, involving approximately 350 French troops. Over the months, they left in waves, no media spectacle, no farewell salutes, just a quiet dismantling of what many had come to see as an outdated arrangement. The bases were emptied, French flags came down, and for the first time since Senegal's independence in 1960, the nation stood free of foreign military occupation on its soil. Yet what makes this moment even more striking is not just the fact that France left, but how they left. There were no ultimatums, no angry confrontations, no sudden ruptures in diplomacy. France didn't have to be forced out, as it was in Mali, Burkina Faso, or Niger, where protests and political crises made its presence untenable. In Senegal, the withdrawal was orderly, respectful, and voluntary, following months of behind-the-scenes dialogue between French and Senegalese officials. The world barely noticed. But inside Senegal and across Africa, the message landed like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a shift in military logistics. It was a symbolic dismantling of Françafrique, the long-criticized system of post-independence arrangements that kept former French colonies politically and militarily tethered to Paris. For decades, these relationships were cloaked in talk of cooperation, defense, and counterinsurgency. But to many Africans, they reeked of soft occupation, unequal power dynamics, and neo-colonial fingerprints. Now, one of the last and most stable pillars of that system has crumbled. Senegal, once considered France's most reliable security partner in the region, has made a clear break. Not with war, not with fury, but with sovereign self-determination. The reaction on the continent has been immediate. In Ivory Coast, whispers are growing about re-evaluating France's troop presence in Abidjan. In Chad, where France maintains another significant base, civil society groups are openly questioning the strategic value of hosting a foreign army. And in the Sahel, where anti-French sentiment has already boiled into expulsions, Senegal's model of a peaceful, negotiated departure is being held up as a template for future exits. Internationally, analysts are scrambling to adjust their assumptions. France's long-term strategic posture in West Africa is now in question. Will it continue its quiet retreat, recalibrating its military presence in favor of training missions and intelligence packs? Or will it dig in elsewhere, trying to hold on to the last remnants of influence? Whatever the outcome, one thing is certain. Senegal has shifted the balance. It didn't scream, it didn't collapse, but it made history. And this wasn't just a policy change. It was the result of a growing movement, led by a new generation of African leadership with a different vision of power, independence, and what sovereignty means. So who led this charge from inside Senegal? Who dared to call France's presence an anomaly and ask them to leave? Let's meet the man behind the mission. Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Elected in March 2025 under a wave of youth-led momentum, Faye represented something profoundly different from his predecessors. A former tax inspector, political prisoner, and ally of firebrand Ousmane Sonko, Faye campaigned not on economic buzzwords or vague reform promises, but on one radical, piercing idea: sovereignty. Not just in slogans, not in abstract terms, but in every fiber of governance, economy, diplomacy, and defense. And in his view, having a foreign military parked on Senegalese soil was the very definition of contradiction. In his first major national address after taking office, Faye didn't mince words. He referred to the French military presence as an anomaly, a relic of a bygone age that no longer aligned with the spirit or the needs of a free modern Senegal. His words weren't shouted. They were calm, measured, and unmistakable. To some, it sounded bold. To others, dangerous. But to most Senegalese, especially the youth who carried him to victory, it sounded long overdue. For years, many had quietly questioned why, more than 6 decades after independence, French troops still occupied bases in Dakar. But under previous governments, the subject was taboo. Leaders justified the arrangement as a matter of strategic necessity, counterinsurgency cooperation, regional stability, and training programs. But Faye broke that silence, offering a different definition of security, one rooted in national dignity and internal strength, not reliance on an external power. This wasn't just about optics. Faye's administration began taking steps immediately. He formed a Defense Transition Commission to audit Senegal's security infrastructure, reviewed all bilateral defense agreements, and initiated closed-door negotiations with Paris, quietly, without grandstanding. And when the agreement to withdraw was finalized, there were no leaks, no media theatrics, just execution. But what makes Faye's approach so revolutionary is not merely that he told France to leave, it's that he did so without confrontation and with a clear replacement plan. In internal government memos that have since been leaked to regional journalists, Faye's defense ministry laid out a strategy to boost local military capacity through indigenous officer training, regional defense alliances, and the expansion of Senegal's defense manufacturing sector. No more dependency on old colonial powers for equipment, logistics, or intelligence. The goal: a self-reliant force with modern capabilities, rooted in Senegalese command. Faye's vision is regional, not isolationist. He expressed support for an African security bloc independent of Western military leadership, one that could link Senegal with like-minded nations such as Ghana, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau, and potentially sync operations with the African Union's long-dormant standby force. But here's the twist. Faye didn't burn the bridge with France. He kept the door open for cooperation, in intelligence, training, and crisis response, on Senegal's terms. The difference is power. France is no longer the landlord, it's a guest. In a continent long haunted by puppet governments and foreign-managed policy, Faye's approach is novel, polite, principled, and potent. He didn't start a war, he started a precedent. Now the question is whether Senegal can defend its sovereignty, not just in speeches, but in strategy. Can a newly sovereign military hold its ground in a region marked by insurgencies, instability, and foreign manipulation? Before we answer that, we need to examine how Senegal plans to build its defense force without leaning on old empires. With the French military gone and President Faye's declaration of sovereignty resonating through West Africa, one question looms larger than any. How will Senegal defend itself? Removing foreign troops is only the first half of a revolution. The real test is building something strong enough to stand on its own. President Faye understands this. His vision for an autonomous Senegalese defense is not symbolic, it's structural. Even before the last French vehicle rolled out of Camp Gile, plans were already underway to re-engineer the country's military architecture from the ground up. What's emerging now is not just a national army, it's a new doctrine of self-reliance. The strategy begins with education. Faye's administration is investing heavily in military academies, aiming to train a new generation of Senegalese officers who are not only skilled in tactics and technology, but also deeply grounded in national identity and African geopolitics. These academies, many of which are being upgraded with state-of-the-art facilities, will offer programs in counterinsurgency, cyber defense, and border security, among others. The goal is to eliminate the need for foreign advisors, especially in leadership and intelligence roles, and develop a truly indigenous command structure. This move has been reinforced by a broader effort to expand Senegal's domestic arms industry. Until now, Senegal has relied on a mixture of French, Turkish, and Chinese military equipment. But under new procurement laws introduced in April 2025, the government is channeling resources into local manufacturing of defense hardware, including drones, armored vehicles, and surveillance systems. Not only does this reduce dependency, it creates jobs and stimulates a new sector of the economy, one rooted in national security. Moreover, Faye is prioritizing regional alliances. Instead of depending on France or the US for counterinsurgency operations, Senegal is reaching out to its West African neighbors to form a joint rapid response force. Early talks with Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia, and Sierra Leone have produced the outline of a regional security initiative focused on shared border defense and coordinated intelligence sharing. This initiative, still in its early stages, could become a model for other African blocs seeking to bypass Western command structures. One of the more controversial components of Faye's strategy is a limited military service program aimed at integrating youth into national security frameworks. Under this proposal, thousands of young Senegalese will undergo basic military training as part of a civilian defense corps. The idea isn't to militarize society, but to ensure that the concept of sovereignty is felt, learned, and lived, especially among the generation that voted for it. There's also a cyber defense front. Recognizing that modern warfare often begins in the digital sphere, the government has quietly begun hiring tech experts and cryptographers to fortify Senegal's digital infrastructure. French advisors previously ran most of Senegal's intelligence IT backbones, but that is being rebuilt with local talent, using encrypted systems that report solely to the Senegalese Intelligence Directorate. Importantly, none of these plans reject international cooperation outright. Faye's model is selective engagement, choosing partners without inheriting masters. While French generals may no longer oversee operations in Dakar, joint training exercises may still occur, as long as Senegal sets the terms. Critics warn that all this could take years to reach full maturity, and they're not wrong. Building a self-reliant defense ecosystem from scratch is no small feat, but Faye and his team argue that true sovereignty is never convenient. It's earned through discipline, sacrifice, and vision. And Senegal isn't just building a military, it's building a model, one that could inspire other African nations to ask the same question. If Senegal can defend itself, why can't we? But while Senegal is building up, France is pulling back. So what's happening on their side of the story? Let's now look at how this quiet exit fits into France's broader retreat from Africa and what it means for their future on the continent. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. While Senegal builds its future, France is reckoning with its past and rapidly rewriting its present. The quiet departure from Senegal was not just an isolated event. It is the latest chapter in a sweeping and unspoken pattern. France's influence in Africa is unraveling, and the world is watching it happen in real time. The withdrawal from Dakar followed 3 high-profile and politically embarrassing exits from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, each marked by public anger, diplomatic collapse, and at times, humiliating ejection. In those cases, military juntas and popular protests turned against Paris with fury, accusing France of meddling, resource exploitation, and selective concern over insurgency. What began as defense cooperation quickly became seen as a colonial hangover. Senegal's decision, though peaceful, sent perhaps the most painful message yet. Even France's most stable, democratic, and long-standing partners are stepping away. It wasn't a coup or crisis that drove France out. It was a democratic vote, followed by a civil conversation. That, for Paris, is more alarming than flags burned in the street. Behind closed doors, French military and diplomatic officials have begun what insiders call a reassessment of strategic posture in West Africa. At the center of this reevaluation is one core idea: no more permanent bases unless necessary. France's new plan is to shift from garrisons to guest rooms, focusing on short-term deployments, training missions, cyber intelligence assistance, and logistical support on invitation only. What does that mean in practice? For starters, France is now pouring resources into its Djibouti base in East Africa, a strategic outpost overlooking the Red Sea, where it still shares territory with the US, China, and Italy. That base remains operational and well-defended, a geopolitical stronghold far from the turbulence of the Sahel. Elsewhere, France is downsizing its presence in Gabon, suspending new deployments in Ivory Coast, and scaling back regional drone operations. Simultaneously, French intelligence services are seeking new ways to maintain influence without boots on the ground. Think digital surveillance contracts, private security liaisons, and military tech exports. But this transition has risks. France's ability to project power in Africa relied heavily on physical infrastructure, airstrips, command centers, logistics hubs. Without those assets, its capacity to respond to crises or support allies is severely reduced. Critics in Paris warn that France is ceding the field to other players, namely Russia, China, and Turkey, all of whom are actively expanding their military and economic presence across Africa. French policymakers defend the pivot as modern and respectful. "We're adapting to the new African reality," one French defense official recently told Le Monde. "The era of paternalism is over. We will partner, not preside." But African leaders and intellectuals see it differently. To them, France's retreat is not a noble evolution, it's a reckoning, a long overdue consequence of overreach, arrogance, and the failure to treat African nations as equals. And now that countries like Senegal are charting independent defense paths, the old model, where Paris played protector and puppet master, is dead on arrival. The psychological blow in France is also profound. West Africa, once seen as the special sphere of French diplomacy, is now disintegrating from Paris's orbit. Think tanks, generals, and diplomats are scrambling to understand how influence that took decades to build evaporated in just a few years. Even French citizens are beginning to ask the uncomfortable question: was it all just an illusion of control? Now, with France exiting stage left and Senegal writing a new chapter of independence, the spotlight turns to the rest of the continent. Will other African nations follow Senegal's lead? Are we witnessing the fall of France-Afrique, or merely its transformation? France's departure from Senegal was more than a military event. It was a continental signal flare. Quiet but piercing, it sent a clear message across African capitals. Sovereignty is not a dream, it's a decision. And now the question echoing through the corridors of power from Abidjan to N'Djamena is no longer if this shift will spread, but how fast and how far. Already the ground is shifting beneath other former French strongholds. In Ivory Coast, where France maintains one of its largest remaining military presences, civil society organizations are gaining traction with calls for a reassessment of foreign military agreements. The Ivorian government under President Alassane Ouattara has long been considered a staunch ally of Paris, but even there, the optics are changing. Youth-led coalitions are drawing inspiration from Senegal's peaceful transition and demanding that their government no longer accept foreign troops as a default setting for security. Further east in Chad, France still retains a sizable base that functions as a regional launchpad for operations in the Sahel. But the political climate is unstable, and Mahamat Déby's transitional regime is under pressure from internal opposition. Critics are increasingly framing France's presence as a crutch that props up unelected leadership. In a region already rattled by coups, Chad is a pressure cooker, and France's military presence there is beginning to look less like protection and more like provocation. Even in Benin and Togo, where French security partnerships have been low-key and technical, local activists are starting to question the terms of those relationships, especially in light of rising youth unemployment and perceptions of foreign favoritism in public contracts. What Senegal did wasn't just an act of defense policy. It gave political language to a new kind of African nationalism that is sophisticated, calculated, and impossible to dismiss as radical. But not all countries are ready or willing to follow Senegal's lead. Cameroon, for example, remains tightly woven into the French military and intelligence network, and President Paul Biya's long-standing rule depends heavily on that support. In such regimes, where France is both patron and protector, the costs of a rupture are higher, and leaders may be reluctant to pursue autonomy if it means losing the security net that shields them from internal dissent. Similarly, Niger's post-coup leadership has aligned more closely with Russia, not necessarily out of ideological conviction, but due to a vacuum left by France. The danger in this shift is that one empire may simply be swapped for another, with African sovereignty again caught between the ambitions of external powers. That's why Senegal's model is so vital. It didn't reject France by embracing another foreign master. It chose independence by designing its architecture of defense, diplomacy, and development. That's the real revolution. And the ripple effect won't just be political, it could be economic. As African nations review their defense pacts, they'll also revisit resource agreements, trade protocols, and investment laws, many of which still disproportionately benefit former colonial powers. If military sovereignty inspires economic realignment, we could be witnessing the start of a second decolonization wave, one grounded not in revolt, but in policy. This is what makes Senegal's move so powerful. It was not explosive, it was strategic, not chaotic, but disciplined. It didn't isolate itself, it repositioned itself. And in doing so, it handed Africa a blueprint, not for rage, but for renewal. Whether other nations will follow remains uncertain. Each country has its history, its struggles, its calculus. But one thing is now undeniable. The myth of necessity has been broken. France didn't have to stay. Senegal didn't collapse without them. And now, across the continent, leaders will have to explain why foreign troops remain, and for whom. Should more African nations demand the removal of foreign troops? Is Senegal's path to sovereignty realistic for the rest of the continent? Let us know in the comments section. What does true independence look like in today's Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.